"No, sir," I replied. "Never have been. This property was excluded from the HOA when the subdivision was developed." Karen jumped in immediately. "He's lying. Everyone in this area falls under our jurisdiction. We have documentation." The sheriff pulled out his tablet, tapped the screen several times, and studied whatever came up. The silence stretched out, filling the space between us until it became almost physical. Then he spoke, his voice measured and slow. "Ma'am, this parcel is recorded as non-HOA land, has been since the original subdivision plat." Karen's face tightened, the muscles around her jaw working visibly. "That's impossible. Our maps clearly show." "Your maps aren't legal documents. County records are." He turned the screen toward her, showing her exactly what he'd found. "It's very possible, and it's very documented." Karen didn't retreat. She pivoted instead, like a chess player seeing her strategy collapse and immediately improvising a new one. "Then he's trespassing on community access land. We have easements throughout this neighborhood. Utility easements, drainage easements." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Which specific easement are you claiming he's violating?" Karen flipped through pages on her clipboard, stalling, searching for something that wasn't there. I spoke before she could invent an answer. "There is no easement on my property. I checked the title twice during closing, and my attorney confirmed it." The sheriff nodded slowly. "He's right. No easements recorded, no HOA authority, no basis for enforcement." Karen's voice sharpened, dropping the pretense of sweetness entirely. "So you're just gonna let him ignore community standards? Let him do whatever he wants while the rest of us follow the rules?" The sheriff's response came ice cold, with the kind of professional detachment that made it sting even more. "I'm gonna let him live on his own legally owned property, ma'am. That's exactly what I'm gonna do." He returned to his car and drove away, leaving Karen standing in my driveway with her clipboard in her phone and her audience of neighbors who had just watched her authority crumble. She leaned toward me before she left, close enough that only I could hear her. "This isn't over. Not even close." 3 days passed quietly. I started to hope the confrontation had ended, that Karen had accepted reality and moved on to easier targets. Then the certified envelope arrived. I signed for it, carried it inside, and tore it open. The document inside was labeled HOA violation in bold red letters. It demanded ID verification, threatened escalating fines, and warned of eviction proceedings if I failed to comply within 10 days. Karen Whitlock's signature sprawled across the bottom, confident and oversized. I stared at it, trying to understand the logic. She had been told, in front of witnesses, by a sheriff with county records on his screen, that she had no authority over my property, and she had responded by putting her threats in writing. My real estate attorney laughed when I read him the letter over the phone. One short laugh followed by silence, followed by words that carried real weight. "Oh, this is gonna hurt her. She just claimed authority she doesn't legally possess, in writing, with her signature. This isn't just overreach anymore. This is fraud." He advised patience. He said, "Let her escalate. People who abuse power can never stop themselves. They always go further." Karen proved him right within a week. The next notice arrived with additional threats, daily accumulating fines, formal eviction review, and warnings about placing a lien on my property. Every claim was illegal. Every threat was documented. Karen had no idea she was building the case against herself, stacking evidence like bricks in a wall that would eventually fall on her. I stood on my porch that evening and watched her black USV crawl past slowly, her phone visible through the driver's window, recording my house, my car, my face. Watching, waiting for me to blink, to fold, to give her what she wanted, because fighting seemed harder than surrendering. I didn't blink. My attorney's email arrived the next morning. "Ready to file. This could shut her down permanently." Before we could act, Karen escalated again. A bright orange paper appeared taped to my mailbox, labeled "Final Notice" in blocky letters. It demanded a copy of my government ID, proof of residency approval from the HOA, and immediate compliance or face enforcement action. Her signature was stamped at the bottom, even bolder than before. I read through the document twice, then noticed what she hadn't expected me to catch. She had listed the wrong parcel number, one that actually was under HOA control. She wasn't just overreaching anymore, she was falsifying jurisdiction, creating paper trails that didn't match reality. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from HOA law firm, their tone dripping with confidence. Failure to cooperate would result in fines, vehicle towing, and eviction proceedings. Eviction from land they didn't own, threatened by people who had never held authority over me. I called them back, keeping my voice calm and professional. Before we continue this conversation, can you confirm that my property is legally part of your client's association? A pause stretched across the line. We are operating under information provided by the HOA president. Then you're operating under false information, I replied. Within an hour, I had emailed them my deed, the county zoning map, and the recorded exclusion from HOA boundaries. 10 minutes after that, silence. The confident law firm had nothing left to say. Karen arrived that afternoon with reinforcements. 2 board members flanked her like bodyguards, their faces set in expressions of manufactured concern. Her clipboard was out, her phone recording, her voice loud enough for passing neighbors to hear. You've ignored multiple official notices. This is your final opportunity to comply. I'm not required to respond to notices from an organization that has no authority over me. You live here. That makes you subject to community oversight. I stepped aside and pointed at the boundary marker, the metal county post half buried in dirt at the edge of my lawn. This is where your authority ends, right here. Everything on this side belongs to me, and me alone. She laughed, the sound brittle and forced. That marker means nothing. Community standards apply to everyone. I turned my phone toward her, making sure she could see it was recording. Actually, that marker means everything, and so does this conversation. Her expression flickered, uncertainty breaking through her confidence for just a moment. Then she turned to one of the board members and ordered him to call their towing company. Have his vehicles removed. He's parked in violation of community regulations. The tow truck arrived fast, driver stepping out with clipboard ready, clearly expecting a routine job. I handed him the same documents I'd been carrying since this started. He read through them, checked the address on his dispatch order, checked it again. Then he shook his head. I can't touch these vehicles. This property isn't HOA controlled. My company could be liable. Karen exploded, her composure finally shattering completely. Do your job. I'm authorizing this removal. The driver looked at her with something between pity and contempt. You can't authorize anything here, and if you keep pushing, I'm calling the sheriff myself. He climbed back into his truck and drove away, leaving Karen standing in my driveway with her board members and her clipboard and nothing else. She turned to face me, her voice low and dangerous. This isn't over. You have no idea what I'm capable of. That night, I found an official-looking eviction notice slipped under my door. The formatting looked real, professional, complete with a case number and what appeared to be a clerk's signature. For a moment, my stomach dropped. Then I looked closer. The case number didn't exist in any searchable database. The clerk's signature belonged to someone who had retired 3 years ago. This wasn't a real legal document. It was a forgery, designed to frighten me into compliance. I drove straight to the county courthouse the next morning. The clerk behind the counter took one look at the document and went pale. This is forged, she said quietly. This is serious. She made a phone call, and within 10 minutes, a sheriff's deputy was examining the paper. Impersonation of legal process, he said, turning it over in his hands. This carries criminal penalties. He looked up at me, his expression grave. Who gave this to you? That evening, deputies knocked on Karen's door. The sun was setting behind the row of identical houses, casting long shadows across manicured lawns. Neighbors materialized on porches up and down the street, phones appearing in hands, watching the scene unfold with the kind of fascination usually reserved for reality television. Karen opened her door and immediately went on the offensive, her voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. "I was just enforcing community standards. This is harassment of a volunteer board member." The deputy held up the forged eviction notice, letting her see exactly what she had created. "Ma'am, this document carries criminal penalties. Forging court paperwork is a felony." Her voice dropped, some of the bluster bleeding away. "You don't understand the situation. He refuses to comply with anything. He's disrupting our entire community." The deputy's response was flat, devoid of sympathy. "He doesn't have to comply. You have no authority over him. That's not an opinion, that's recorded fact." Karen's face drained of color as the reality of her situation finally began to penetrate. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't something she could spin or manipulate or outlast. As the deputies walked away, one turned back with a final warning. "Do not contact this resident again. Any further harassment will result in immediate arrest." Karen stood in her doorway watching them leave, and I could see it in her posture, the way her shoulders curved inward. This wasn't a power struggle anymore. This was a criminal record waiting to happen. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected, more intimate. The county clerk stood at the front, pulling up property files on a screen visible to everyone present. Karen sat at the opposing table with her attorney, a man who looked increasingly uncomfortable with every passing minute. The clerk turned the screen toward Karen's lawyer. "Parcel 47B has been recorded as non-HOA land since the subdivision's original inception. This isn't ambiguous, it's foundational." Karen leaned forward, unable to contain herself. "That's impossible! Our HOA map clearly shows—" "Your HOA map is marketing material," the clerk interrupted, her patience visibly thin. "It's not a legal boundary document. It never was. Anyone with access to county records could have verified this in 5 minutes." Silence filled the room. The judge raised an eyebrow, studying Karen with an expression that promised nothing good. "So you attempted enforcement actions against a property owner without verifying whether you had jurisdiction?" Karen's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The judge requested the HOA's complete enforcement history on non-member properties, and what emerged was worse than anyone had anticipated. Warning letters sent to homes outside their boundaries, fines issued without legal authority, towing threats against vehicles they had no right to touch, interference with utility access for residents who refused to comply with demands they were never obligated to follow. The courtroom murmured as the pattern became clear. My attorney stood, his voice cutting through the noise. This wasn't a mistake. This was policy, systematic intimidation of property owners who didn't know their rights. Karen snapped from her seat. "We were protecting community standards. Someone has to maintain property values." The judge looked at her with something between disappointment and disgust. "You don't protect standards by inventing authority you don't possess. You don't maintain communities by terrorizing the people who live in them." My attorney filed a motion for sanctions against the entire HOA board. Outside the courthouse, Karen cornered me near the parking structure, her face twisted with fury, and something else, something that looked almost like desperation. "You'll regret humiliating us," she hissed, keeping her voice low so only I could hear. "We'll bury you in legal fees. We'll make this so expensive you'll wish you'd just shown your ID that first day." I pulled out my phone and activated the recorder, making sure she could see exactly what I was doing. "Say that again?" Her eyes widened. She stepped backward, nearly stumbling, realizing too late what she had done. The threat was already captured, preserved in digital clarity. Back in court the following week, the judge listened to the recording once. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture hardened. Threatening a private landowner outside your jurisdiction is unacceptable. Doing so after being explicitly warned by law enforcement suggests a fundamental inability to understand boundaries, both legal and personal. He turned to Karen directly. Do you understand the difference between a homeowners association and a government agency? Karen stared at the table in front of her, refusing to meet his eyes. You will understand, he said. By the time this case concludes, you will understand completely. He ordered a full audit of the HOA's enforcement practices, conducted by an independent state investigator. What that audit revealed destroyed whatever remained of Karen's position. Selective enforcement based on personal grudges, fabricated violation notices for residents who challenged her authority, improper fine collection with no legal basis, and worst of all, money collected from non-members, people like me who had never agreed to any HOA governance, who had never signed any covenant, who owed them nothing. That crossed the line from harassment into fraud. Karen's attorney requested a recess. The judge denied it. The state investigator entered the courtroom, a woman with silver hair and an expression that suggested she had seen every variety of petty corruption imaginable. She spoke calmly, laying out her findings without emotion or embellishment. This HOA has systematically violated state consumer protection laws. We are suspending all enforcement authority pending complete review of their practices. No fines may be collected, no violations may be issued, no contact may be made with any resident under investigation. Karen's power evaporated in a single sentence. The judge turned to me, his voice softer now. You were never required to show identification. You were never subject to eviction. You were never obligated to comply with any demand they made. He paused, letting the words settle. And you were right to challenge them. The system only works when people refuse to accept false authority. Karen stared at the floor, motionless, defeated. The judge scheduled a final ruling, including damages. Karen filed her own lawsuit the same way she did everything else, loudly, sloppily, and without regard for reality. Her claims included unauthorized residency, failure to identify to HOA authority, and something she called a community safety violation. Her attorney presented the filing like it was a formality, like victory was already assured. The judge flipped through the pages once, then stopped. Why is the HOA asserting jurisdiction over a non-member property? We've already established this parcel is excluded. Karen's attorney hesitated, caught off guard by a question he should have anticipated. We assumed, based on geographic proximity. Assumptions aren't jurisdiction. Proximity isn't authority. What else do you have? Under oath, the HOA was required to submit their governing documents, and under oath, lies don't survive. The bylaws confirmed everything. My lot was never annexed into the association. No easement authority existed. No enforcement rights applied. No identification requirement was valid. Then came the emails. Internal communications that should never have seen daylight. One message from Karen to her board members was particularly damaging. He's outside HOA limits, but if we pressure him early, he'll comply anyway. They always do. The courtroom went silent. Karen stopped taking notes. Her attorney stared straight ahead, already calculating how to minimize the damage. The judge asked a single question, his voice cold. Does the HOA understand the concept of harassment? The evidence continued mounting. Dispatch logs revealed 3 prior 911 calls from Karen, all involving non-HOA residents, all using the same language, all resulting in no action because no violation existed. The sheriff who had responded to my initial confrontation testified about the pattern. She uses emergency services as leverage, he explained. When people don't comply, she calls us to intimidate them into submission. It's a waste of resources, and it undermines actual emergencies. Karen interrupted from her seat. I was protecting the community from people who don't follow rules. The judge looked up slowly. From what, exactly? From private citizens exercising their legal property rights, from homeowners who had the audacity to purchase land outside your control. He ordered the 911 calls entered as evidence of abuse of process. My attorney stood to file our counterclaim: harassment, abuse of authority, false eviction threats, emotional distress, civil rights violations. The judge accepted each claim without hesitation. Karen whispered frantically to her attorney, but he had nothing left to offer. His expressions said everything. They had lost, and they had lost completely. The judge ordered mediation, with penalties paused pending the outcome. It was a formality, a last chance for Karen to acknowledge reality and negotiate a settlement. She walked into that mediation room furious, unwilling to accept that her authority had ever been questioned. "You could have just shown your ID," she snapped at me across the table. "None of this had to happen." I kept my voice level. "You could have checked your boundaries before threatening to evict me from my own home." The mediator asked Karen one simple question: "Why did you threaten eviction against someone you had no authority over?" Karen answered honestly, perhaps for the first time, and her honesty condemned her. "Because people usually give in. Nobody wants to fight. They show their ID, they pay the fine, they move on. It's easier for everyone." The mediator stopped writing. The session ended early, declared failed due to bad faith. The final ruling was devastating. The HOA was fined for systematic harassment. Karen was held personally liable for damages. She was required to resign from the HOA board immediately and permanently. A permanent injunction prohibited any contact with me, any enforcement attempts, any surveillance of my property. All my legal fees were awarded in full. The judge's final words cut through the courtroom like a blade. "You are not the government. You are not law enforcement. You do not have the authority to demand identification from people you don't govern. The power you believed you held was always an illusion, sustained only by the compliance of people who didn't know they could refuse." He looked directly at Karen. "That illusion is over." She stared straight ahead, motionless, all the power and confidence and authority drained away, leaving nothing but a woman who had mistaken a clipboard for a crown. Karen resigned within 48 hours. The HOA quietly revised their rules, their boundaries, their entire approach to enforcement. The threatening letters stopped, the cameras disappeared from my street, the law firm stopped calling. One of my neighbors approached me weeks later, a man I'd seen watching from his porch during that first confrontation. "She tried this on me too," he admitted, 3 years ago. "I just paid the fine because I didn't know I could say no." I looked at my property line, the boundary marker now clearly visible, cleaned of dirt and surrounded by fresh mulch. "You always could," I said. "You just had to stand still long enough to realize it." He nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes, some old weight lifting. "Thank you for standing still." I watched him walk back to his house, to his property, to the life he had every right to live without interference from people who had never held any real authority over him. The sun was setting again, casting the same long shadows across the same manicured lawns, but something fundamental had changed. The camera pulls back from my home, peaceful and quiet, finally free from false authority. The property marker stands at the edge of the lawn, a small monument to the power of simply knowing your rights and refusing to surrender them. Some boundaries exist on maps, others exist only in the courage to enforce them.